I never thought I'd be the one telling a story like this. For 68 years, I kept my head down, worked hard, minded my business, and figured the worst thing life could throw at me was already behind me. I was wrong. What happened in my own dining room, over a wooden clock my father carved with his own 2 hands, taught me that the people who smile the widest at your table can be the ones sharpening a knife under it. This isn't a story I'm telling for sympathy. I'm telling it because somewhere out there, another old man or woman is sitting in a house that used to feel safe, wondering if they're losing their mind. You're not. I promise you, you're not. My name is Walter. I live in a greenhouse at the end of Larkspur Lane, the same house where I raised my son, buried my wife, and, until recently, believed my family was whole. It started, like most disasters do, on an ordinary evening. The rain had let up by the time my son Daniel pulled into the driveway with his wife Renee and my granddaughter Junie in the back seat. Junie was 11, all elbows and freckles, with her late grandmother's green eyes and a habit of asking questions nobody else thought to ask. She'd never met my wife, Dorothy. Passed 6 years before Junie was born, taken fast by a stroke on a Sunday morning while she was watering her tomato plants. I still remember the sound the watering can made when it hit the porch steps. But Junie knew her grandmother anyway. She knew her through the stories I told at the dinner table, through the smell of the cedar chest where Dot's old sweater still lived, and through one object in particular, a mantel clock, hand-carved from black walnut, that my father had built for Dot and me as a wedding gift 44 years ago. The sat on the dining room sideboard, ticking through every dinner, every holiday, every quiet evening of my life. Dot used to say that clock had heard more secrets than a priest in a confessional booth. Junie loved that clock. She'd press her ear against the wood and swear she could hear Grandma Dot's heartbeat still ticking inside it. I never had the heart to tell her it was just gears and springs. Some truths are better left as magic when you're 11. That night, dinner started normal enough. Renee came in complaining about traffic, then about the humidity, then about how the house Dot and I built our whole married life in smelled like old wood and mothballs. I'd heard versions of this complaint for 3 years, ever since Daniel married her. Renee wasn't a bad person when I first met her. Or maybe I just wanted to believe that, the way you want to believe a storm cloud will pass you by. She was a woman who needed things to revolve around her. The house had to be renovated her way. The holidays had to be spent where she wanted. And most of all, my late wife's memory had to disappear, because as long as Dot's things sat on my shelves, Renee felt like she was living in someone else's shadow. "Daniel?" she said, dropping her purse onto a kitchen chair like it had personally wronged her. "We need to talk about this house. It's a museum. It's depressing. Junie's growing up surrounded by a dead woman's leftovers." I felt my jaw tighten, but I said nothing. 30 years of marriage teaches you when to hold your tongue, and 68 years of living teaches you when holding it isn't worth the trouble. Daniel, God love him, tried to keep the peace the way he always did. "Ren, come on. Not tonight. Dad just wants a nice dinner." "I'm just saying," she pressed. "That clock, for instance, it's ugly, it's outdated, it doesn't even keep good time anymore. That clock kept perfect time." She just wanted a reason. Junie, who'd been quietly setting the table, looked up with those green eyes. "Grandpa says Grandma's heart is inside it," she said, so soft and matter-of-fact that for a second even Renee seemed thrown off balance. Renee let out a short laugh, the kind that isn't really a laugh at all. "Junie, sweetheart, that's not real. It's a piece of furniture. Your grandfather tells you stories because he's lonely." "Renee." Daniel's voice had an edge now. "What? I'm just being honest. This family needs a little honesty." I should have spoken up right there. I should have told her that in my house, we didn't insult the dead at the dinner table, but I looked at Junie's face, saw her trying so hard not to cry, and I decided the kindest thing I could do was stay calm and steer us toward safer water. "Let's just eat," I said. "Food's getting cold." We almost made it through dinner in peace. Almost. It was dessert when things went sideways. Junie, trying to lighten the mood the way children do, asked me in front of everyone what Grandma Dot's laugh sounded like. I told her it was loud, unladylike, the kind of laugh that made strangers in restaurants turn around and smile without knowing why. Junie giggled at that, delighted, and reached over to touch the clock on the sideboard, the way she always did, like she was saying hello to a piece of her grandmother. Renee's patience, thin as tissue paper to begin with, finally tore. Enough, she snapped, standing so fast her chair scraped against the floor. I am sick and tired of living in a shrine to a woman who's been dead for years. This ends tonight. Before Daniel or I could even process what she meant, she crossed the room, grabbed the clock off the sideboard with both hands, and marched toward the kitchen. Renee, what are you doing? Daniel shot up from his seat. Fixing this family, she said, and there was a terrible calm in her voice. The calm of someone who has rehearsed cruelty in their head so many times it finally feels natural to say out loud. She walked straight to the sink, turned the garbage disposal switch, and before any of us could reach her, she shoved the antique clock face first into the drain. The sound that followed haunts me to this day. The grinding of gears, the splintering of 44-year-old walnut wood, the screech of metal tearing metal. It was over in seconds. What came out the other side was unrecognizable shards of wood, bent brass hands, the delicate glass face shattered into 100 pieces scattered across the counter. There, Renee said, breathing hard, almost triumphant. Now maybe we can start living in the present. The kitchen went dead silent, except for the disposal still grinding on empty. Daniel stood frozen, his mouth open, no sound coming out. I felt something in my chest cave inward, like a support beam giving way in a house I thought was sturdy, but it was Junie who moved first. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just ran straight past her stunned father, straight to the sink, and plunged both her small hands down into the disposal opening, still grasping at the broken pieces, desperate to save even a splinter of the thing that connected her to a grandmother she never got to meet. Junie, no. I heard myself roar, a sound I didn't know my old lungs could still make. It happened so fast. The disposal blades caught the edge of her sleeve and then her hand. She screamed a sound that will live in my nightmares until the day I die and yanked her arm back, blood already streaming from 2 deep gashes across her fingers and palm. Daniel snapped out of his shock and lunged for her, scooping her up, screaming for someone to shut off the switch. I threw myself across the kitchen and slammed my palm against the disposal switch, killing the motor, my hands shaking so violently I could barely manage it. Junie was sobbing, clutching her bleeding hand to her chest, and in that hand impossibly, unbelievably she held 2 small fragments of blackened walnut wood and a single bent brass number 4, all that remained of the clock her grandmother's memory lived inside. "It's okay, baby, it's okay," Daniel kept saying, though his voice cracked on every word, wrapping a dish towel around her hand as blood soaked through almost instantly. And then I saw Renee's face. I expected horror. I expected guilt, panic, something resembling a human being watching a child bleed in front of her. Instead, I saw irritation, actual, undisguised irritation, like Junie's pain was an inconvenience to her evening. "Oh my God, she's being so dramatic," Renee said, rolling her eyes. "It's a scratch. Kids are so sensitive now." That was the moment I watched my son break. I had never, in 30-some years, seen Daniel raise his voice at his wife, let alone his hand. He was a gentle man, a peacekeeper to a fault, the kind of son who apologized for things that weren't his fault just to keep the house quiet. But something in him snapped clean in half that night. He turned to Renee, his daughter's blood staining his shirt sleeve, and for the first time in his life, he didn't try to smooth things over. "Get out," he said, low and shaking. "Get out of this house right now." "Excuse me?" Renee's irritation flared into outrage. "This is my husband's house, too. You don't get to." "Get out," Daniel roared, loud enough that Junie flinched against his chest. "Dad, call 911. She needs stitches. She needs a doctor. Now." I fumbled for the kitchen phone, my old fingers clumsy with adrenaline, and dialed for an ambulance while Daniel pressed a clean towel hard against Junie's palm, murmuring to her, telling her she was the bravest girl in the whole world, that Grandma Dot would be so proud of her. Renee stood there, arms crossed, somehow still managing to look like the wronged party. "This is insane. Everyone is overreacting. It's a scratch, Daniel." "You put our daughter's hand in a garbage disposal," Daniel said, and his voice had gone somewhere cold and quiet that scared me more than the shouting had. "You will never touch anything of my mother's again. You will never speak to my daughter like that again." Something shifted, behind Renee's eyes. Then, something I hadn't seen before. The mask of the wounded, misunderstood wife slid away, and underneath was a woman calculating her next move like a chess player who'd just lost her queen and needed a way to flip the board. "You're going to regret this," she said quietly, and then she turned and walked toward the hallway. I should have followed her. I should have known. But Junie was crying, the sirens were approaching, and my whole world had narrowed down to my granddaughter's small, trembling hand. The paramedics arrived within minutes. End quote. They were kind, quick, professional cleaning and wrapping Junie's hand, checking her over, telling us the cuts were deep but the tendons looked intact, that she'd need stitches at the hospital but she'd likely keep full use of her fingers. Small mercies. Junie, brave as anything, held up the 2 blackened splinters of wood in her uninjured hand and showed the paramedic like they were trophies. "This was my grandma's," she said. "I saved her." The paramedic, a young woman with kind eyes, glanced at me over Junie's head, and I saw her understand, in that unspoken way strangers sometimes do, that there was a much bigger story here than a kitchen accident. Daniel rode in the ambulance with Junie. I told him I'd follow in my truck. But when I turned to grab my keys from the hallway table, I realized the hallway was empty. Renee was gone. And so, I noticed with a cold drop in my stomach, was my truck key ring the spare set I always kept hanging by the door for emergencies. I searched the house in a rising panic, and that's when I heard it, the click of the guest bathroom door lock from the inside, followed by Renee's voice, muffled but sharp, clearly on the phone. "Mom, you need to get over here right now," she was saying. "No, listen to me." Daniel hit no, he didn't hit me, but he's going to say things. "We need our story straight before the cops or the lawyers get involved. That old man is going to try to say I hurt her on purpose. We need to say it was an accident, that I told her not to touch it, that this is somehow his fault for letting a child get near a working appliance." My blood went cold standing in that hallway. She wasn't scared for Junie. She wasn't scared for herself. Not really. She was building a story where she was the victim. And I was the reckless old fool who'd endangered a child in his own home. I knocked softly on the bathroom door, keeping my voice as steady as I could manage. "Renee, I need my truck keys, please. I need to get to the hospital." There was a pause. End quote. Then her voice, "Sir, be sweet," seeped through the door. "1 second, Walter. I'm just finishing up a call with my mother. She's very upset." I heard her whisper something else into the phone I couldn't quite make out, and then the door opened. She stepped out, eyes red-rimmed from what I now understood were manufactured tears, and pressed the keys into my palm. "I'm so sorry about tonight, Walter," she said, her voice trembling with practiced sorrow. "This whole thing has just been such a nightmare. I hope you know I never meant for Junie to get hurt." I looked at this woman, my son's wife, the mother of my granddaughter, and for the first time I understood that I was not looking at someone who'd made a terrible mistake. I was looking at someone who saw her own family as a stage, and everyone else as props to be arranged however suited her best. "We'll talk later," I said, and left her standing in my hallway. At the hospital, Junie got 12 stitches across 2 fingers and her palm. The doctor said she'd been lucky half an inch deeper and she might have lost function in her hand permanently. Daniel sat beside her bed, gray-faced, holding her uninjured hand while she slept off the sedative, exhausted from adrenaline and tears. "Dad, Claude, Dad," he said quietly, not looking up from Junie's sleeping face. "I should have seen this coming. The way she talks about Mom, the way she's always resented anything that reminds her she's not the first, not the only. I told myself it was just insecurity. I told myself it would pass. You couldn't have known she'd do something like this," I said, though, even as I said it, doubt was creeping into my mind. Because something about the way Renee had reacted, not the cruelty of the act, which was shocking enough, but the coldness of her response afterward, the immediate pivot to damage control told me this wasn't the first time she'd rehearsed managing a crisis of her own making. We brought Junie home 2 days later, her hand wrapped in gauze, cradling those 2 blackened splinters of walnut wood in a small jewelry box Daniel had given her. The closest thing she had left to her grandmother. Renee had gone quiet in those 2 days, unnervingly so, sweet and accommodating in a way that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. She brought Junie a stuffed rabbit. She made Daniel's favorite dinner. She apologized so many times the word lost its meaning. I should have known it was a performance. I should have known the quiet was the eye of the storm, not the end of it. It was on the fourth night, after Daniel had gone out to pick up Junie's antibiotics from the pharmacy, that Renee came to find me in the den, where I'd taken to sleeping in Dot's old reading chair, unable to face the empty side of my own bed some nights. "Walter," she said, and her voice had changed entirely. Gone was the syrupy apology, replaced with something flat and businesslike. "We need to discuss what happened." "I think we've discussed it plenty," I said. "Not really." I said, "Not really. See, here's the thing. Daniel's going to want to leave me. I can see it in his eyes. And when he does, I'm going to need somewhere to land, and Junie is going to need stability. This house is plenty big enough for all of us, don't you think? Maybe it's time you consider signing some of it over, for Junie's sake, so she has security no matter what happens between her father and me." I sat there, stunned into silence, as this woman who 4 nights earlier had mutilated her daughter's hand through sheer casual cruelty calmly suggested that I hand over the deed to the home I'd built with my late wife, as some kind of insurance policy for her own future comfort. "You put our granddaughter's hand in a garbage disposal," I said slowly, "and now you're asking me for my house." "I didn't put her hand anywhere," Renee said, and there it was, the same cold recalculation I'd heard through the bathroom door. "She reached in on her own. Nobody can prove otherwise," Renee said, and frankly, Walter, an old man living alone, prone to dramatic stories about his dead wife talking through furniture. A good lawyer could make quite a case that you're not fit to be the primary influence in a child's life. I'd hate for it to come to that. For everyone's sake, let's just be reasonable. I felt something in me go very still and very clear, the way I imagine a soldier must feel the moment fear turns into focus. She wasn't just cruel, she was dangerous. And she just threatened, without quite saying the words out loud, to use my grandchild as a weapon to take everything I had left. "Get out of my den," I said quietly. Her eyes flashed. "You're going to regret talking to me like that." "I already regret every day I didn't say something sooner," I told her. "Now get out." She left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle Dot's old photographs on the wall. I sat there in the dark for a long time after that, my heart pounding, my mind racing through everything that had happened, the clock, the blood, the whispered phone call, and now this. And I understood, with a clarity that frightened me, that Renee wasn't going to stop. Not until she had what she wanted, or until someone stopped her. I did the only thing I could think to do. I called my late wife's brother, my brother-in-law Frank, who'd spent 30 years as a family law attorney before he retired. I told him everything: the clock, Junie's hand, the whispered call to her mother, the threat in my den. Frank went quiet on the other end of the line for a long moment. "Walter," he finally said, "I want you to do something for me tonight, and I want you to do it carefully. I want you to start keeping a written record, dated, of everything she says to you from this point forward. And if you can, safely, without putting yourself at risk, I want you to get some of it recorded. Not to trap her, to protect Junie." I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at Dot's old writing desk, and I wrote down every word of that conversation while it was still fresh, my hands shaking with something between grief and rage. The opportunity came 2 nights later. Daniel had taken Junie to a follow-up appointment to check her stitches, and I was alone in the house with Renee for the first time since the incident. I'd slipped my old digital recorder, the kind I used to use for recording sermons at church, into my shirt pocket, the microphone just peeking over the seam. I found Renee in the kitchen, standing exactly where she'd stood 4 nights earlier, staring at the sink like it held some kind of memory for her too. "We need to finish our conversation from the other night," I said, keeping my voice even. She turned, and I watched her decide, in real time, which version of herself to show me. She chose cold and businesslike again. "Have you thought about what I said? About the house?" "I've thought about it," I said. "I've thought about a lot of things. Like how you called your mother before you called an ambulance for a bleeding child. Like how you told her you needed to get your story straight before anyone else got involved." Something flickered across her face, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her in days. Fear, maybe, or the beginning of it. I don't know what you think you heard. I don't know what you think you heard," I don't know what you think you heard. First, I heard everything, Renee, every word, and I think you've been planning this for longer than 4 days. And 4 days. And I think you married my son because you saw a comfortable life, and when that comfortable life came with a mother-in-law's ghost and a stubborn old man who wouldn't hand over his house, you decided you needed a plan B. You have no proof of any of that, she snapped, and I could see the calm slipping, the real Renee starting to show through the cracks like water through a dam. I don't need proof of what you're thinking, I said. It's Fom. I have proof of what you said. Every word, from 4 nights ago, and every word tonight. I pulled the small recorder from my pocket and set it on the counter between us, the red light steady and unmistakable. Renee's face went through an entire storm in the space of 2 seconds, disbelief, fury, and then, worst of all, a kind of desperate calculation, like she was already trying to figure out her next move even as the ground crumbled beneath her. You old fool, she hissed, lunging for the recorder. I was faster than she expected, sweeping it off the counter and into my jacket pocket before her fingers closed on empty air. She stumbled forward, catching herself on the counter, and when she straightened up, whatever thin civility remained had burned away completely. You have no idea what you've done, she spat. I will make sure you never see that little girl again. I will tell everyone you're a dangerous old man who can't be trusted alone with a child. Who do you think a judge is going to believe? A stable young mother or a senile widower who talks to furniture? You put her hand in a garbage disposal, I said, my voice shaking now with something I hadn't let myself feel until that moment, pure, righteous anger. And I have you on tape planning to lie about it. She went for the door then, I think meaning to run, to get to her car, to get away and regroup and rebuild her story before anyone could stop her. But I stepped in front of the doorway, an old man blocking the exit of a woman half his age, and something in my stillness must have unnerved her, because she stopped. Sit down, Renee. Down, 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 I said. Daniel and Junie will be home soon, and we're going to have a very honest conversation as a family. And then, if you'd like, we can call the police together and you can explain to them exactly what you told your mother that night, in your own words, since I already have it in mine. She didn't sit. She stood frozen by the door, her chest heaving, calculating, always calculating, until finally headlights swept across the kitchen window and Daniel's car pulled into the driveway. What followed was the hardest, most necessary conversation of my life. Daniel sat at the kitchen table with Junie's small hand-drawn get-well card still on the counter from her follow-up visit, and I played him the recording both nights, back to back. I watched my son's face age 10 years in the space of 6 minutes, watched him listen to his wife plotting to steal a story to weaponize their daughter's injury, to threaten his father's home for her own security. Junie, thankfully, was upstairs asleep, spared from hearing her mother's voice describe her injury as a scratch and a useful lever for negotiation. Daniel didn't yell. He didn't slap anything or anyone this time. He just sat very still for a long moment, and then he looked at Renee with an expression I'd never seen on my son's face before, not anger exactly, but a kind of final, exhausted clarity. I want a divorce, he said quietly, and I want full custody. And if you fight me on either one, I will play this recording for every lawyer, every judge, and every family court mediator who will listen. Renee's composure cracked completely then. She cried, she raged, she tried every version of herself she had left in her arsenal: wounded wife, misunderstood mother, victim of an elderly man's paranoid recording, but the tape didn't lie, and Frank, when we called him that very night, confirmed that between the recorded threats and the medical report on Junie's injuries, we had more than enough to protect both my granddaughter and my home. The following months were not easy ones. There were lawyers, there were mediators, there was a long and grueling process that tested every ounce of patience I had left in my old bones. But in the end, Daniel got full custody. Renee got visitation, supervised for the first year given the circumstances, and she got exactly none of my house, none of my savings, and none of the leverage she tried so hard to build for herself. Junie's hand healed well, though she carries 2 thin white scars across her fingers and palm now, permanent as the walnut grain that used to run through my father's clock. Some nights, she still presses that hand against her chest and asks me to tell her about her grandmother, and I do, every single time, because that's a story worth telling as many times as she wants to hear it. We never did get the clock back, of course. There was nothing left to save. But Daniel, without telling me, took the two small blackened splinters Junie had pulled from the wreckage and had them set into a small glass pendant which he gave to her on her 12th birthday. She wears it every day now, tucked under her shirt, close to her heart, the last physical piece of a grandmother she never got to meet but somehow, through all of this, has come to know better than most people know the living. As for me, I've learned some hard lessons in my 68 years, but none harder or more valuable than the ones that came out of that terrible night in my kitchen. I learned that cruelty doesn't always announce itself with shouting. Sometimes it walks in quietly, wearing a wedding ring and a friendly smile, and waits years for the right moment to show its true face. I learned that the people who claim to love your family the most are sometimes the ones most willing to use it against you. And I learned that an old man with a little patience, a little wisdom, and one small recorder in his shirt pocket can still protect the people he loves, even when the whole world seems determined to make him feel powerless. Every evening now, Daniel and Junie come by for dinner, just the three of us at the table where a walnut clock used to tick away the hours. The sideboard where it once sat is empty now, except for a single photograph of Dot, laughing on our front porch on a summer afternoon, and beside it, a small wooden box Daniel built himself, holding nothing but memory and love. Junie still presses her ear to that empty spot on the sideboard sometimes, and when I ask her what she's listening for, she just smiles and says she can still hear it ticking, somewhere, if she listens hard enough. I don't correct her. Some truths are better left as magic, especially the ones that carry us through the worst nights of our lives and out the other side into something like peace.